Hello all, Alison here and welcome back to Words and Pictures. We're going to have a little play today with a method I find really inspiring and playful and freeing to create backgrounds, and as you'll see it involves working in a series again. There's a bunch of quartets here, 4 quartets in fact, which is the perfect number of quartets, 4 fours. That have all been started out in the same way, although I've then varied how I've created the different backgrounds. So these are some very recent ones from my new stamp release where there's some gesso and paint. These two sets have similar things going on in the backgrounds. There's mixed media, there's crackle, there's pen work, brush work, some stamping, all kinds of things with simple collaging over the top. This is the version we're going to focus on today, but we'll come back to these another day if that seems like something that's interesting. These have some embossing resist in them and watercolor paint. So we'll see how far we get today. We might get as far as doing some stamping as well, but we're going to focus first of all on getting some white. I think this is white embossing I did. You could do clear embossing over white paper. You absolutely could. I think I used white embossing powder for these. We'll see what comes first today. But that created just this little quartet. I think it was the first of the quartets I made, actually. And we'll have a look at these embossed watercolor backgrounds today. So I'm going to clear the decks and I'll be back in a moment with the supplies. And here we go. I think I've got everything I need. We'll see as we go. I might need to run away and grab some other things if I've forgotten. But I've got some watercolor paper just in a pad here. It's 200 gram weight, 90 pounds cold press. It's not the most expensive watercolor paper, nor is it the cheapest. It's been a really great pad to use. There is some ink and embossing powder. That's Wow Opaque Bright White. Any white embossing powder will do you. There's some masking tape. I've got a stamp set, so it's one of my summer collection of botanicals. The Cornflower edition, Eclectica Alison Bomber 34 by PaperArtsy. And really all I want it for is the text down at the bottom. So it could be any of my sets or it could be any other sort of vintage text you've got. Will make a nice background detail for that. I've got some watercolor paints. So I've got my Art to Basic watercolors over here. And then I've got just a tray full of, these are American Journey watercolors from the tube that I've just put out into a tray in little lumps. These are some of the ones I was using for my faux cyanotypes, if you've seen those in the recent stamp release. So that's just a tray full of watercolor paint, basically, that might come in handy alongside some of these. There's an ink pad, Archival ink pad. If you're stamping in an opaque embossing powder, it really shouldn't matter what colour you're using. I prefer to stamp in a pale colour if I'm using white. It just makes sense to me. A long time ago, I went off embossing ink. I just find it too sticky. And also, I kind of don't like that slightly sickly sweet smell you get with embossing ink. So I tend to stamp detail stamps in Archival because I find it gives me a nice fine stamping so that when it's something little like this text, you get a clear image, even with the embossing powder. And then I've got a couple of watercolour brushes to play with. So the starting point for this is to get ourselves a sheet of paper and mask it up. So I think I'm just going to tear it out of the pad to keep things simple. I'm not going to mask it down to the mat just yet, although I will do that eventually because I want to be able to shake off my embossing powder. I'm just going to eyeball this. If you're somebody who likes to be really precise about these things, by all means measure halfway across the page vertically. Snip that off. Halfway across the page horizontally. All my quartets have slightly unevenly sized postcards and I'm fine with that. You can see it already wants to stick down to there, but I don't want you to do that quite yet. That will be useful later on. So when I cut these up, I'm going to be cutting down the midline of the masking tape, which will give me a slightly narrower border. So when I'm going around the edge, I don't want to stick the whole of the masking tape on. I want I want it about halfway on the paper and halfway off. So that's going to give me the same size border at the tops and bottoms and other edges as I'm eventually going to have going down the middle. I'm not sticking this down too hard. So there's a balancing act to be had always with masking tape and watercolour paper. I'm just using builder's masking tape. I've not got your fancy artsy low tack tape or any of that, although you can now get low tack builder's tape, because when you peel it away from the paper, if you've stuck it down really, really firmly, there's a danger you'll rip your paper as it comes up. Now, again, you know what I'm going to say. I don't altogether mind that because it gives me extra texture. But if you're somebody who wants to preserve your beautifully edged watercolour papers, get off. So maybe I should just have stuck it down in the first place. No, because I've got to shake off the powder. It's no good having it stuck down just yet. But I do want it marked out at this point, because there's no point stamping and embossing in places where eventually there's going to be masking tape. So for now, that's all good. But what I might do is do it all in one fell swoop. So I've now got 4 postcards ready to be trimmed, but I'm going to work on them as a whole. And this is one of the reasons I really like working this way in a series, is you get 4 times the amount of work done in pretty much the same amount of time. So I'm going to take my acrylic stamp pad. I'm going to fish out my piece of text that I want. And although I'll do a couple of stampings using the stamp pad, I will then do some peeling on and off actually as well. Ooh, see, I'm now looking at this one and thinking that would be a lovely detail to also have. So this background stamping doesn't have to be text. I'm words and pictures, so I'm quite keen on having text. Let's make sure this is the right way up. And I thought I'd use the cornflowers just because it's summer and there are cornflowers everywhere in the fields here at the moment. So cornflowers seemed like the right thing to have. Watercolour paper is quite absorbent, so very carefully I'm going to try and remember I've got the lid off that so that I can get that on in a hurry if I need it. And I'm just going to do some fairly random stamping, sprinkle. That's good. Stamping somewhere else. So as usual with my composition, that's gone down and left. I'm going to go up and right. Sprinkle. I'm getting the powder on fast because, as I say, the watercolour paper is quite absorbent. If you're working with a slicker surface, which you absolutely can, you'll get a different effect with your watercolours on a slick surface than you will on watercolour paper. I'm going to go sort of middle-ish, middle-high. This won't be the only text stamping I do. Right, so now I'm running out of embossing powder. So what I need is another piece of paper to catch it on. I usually have folded bits of paper lying around, maybe gel prints I'm not very keen on. I'm going to lift that up. Yeah, and here's fun. So that's stuck itself down again. Now I'm going to have powder flying everywhere if I'm not careful. So take your time getting your paper up off the mat again. And then just tip that into here. Off it goes. And you can see that that powder has stuck to the wet ink. And let's tip that back into its pot. And we're good to go again. One of the things I love about embossing powder is you use it and you do a big emboss like that and you've still got a full pot full. So carefully out of the way so I don't knock it over. I don't usually spend a long time with open embossing powder pots hanging around because that's just asking for trouble. And we'll pop this one kind of here. Get some powder on it. So I'm doing my usual compositional thing of moving the text around, and then I'm just going to roll a couple in relation to what's already here. So this one will go sort of here-ish. This one will go sort of here-ish. And if I'm quick, I can get all of this done in one powdering go. This one kind of here-ish. And this powder here, I've put inky fingerprints on that one. I don't mind, that's going to be some extra texture. And there, and then sprinkle, 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 sprinkle. In fact, there's loads on there, so I can just kind of shake that around a little bit to make sure I've really got coverage on all the bits of ink. Grand. Where's my rescue paper? Tip it on. And now I've got it all over. Some of it is more embossing powdery than other bits. That's fine. So you're going to have some places where it's a really good bright white. You're going to have other places where it's slightly dimmer. And again, that weathered, worn look is absolutely what I'm after. The eagle-eyed amongst you may have noticed that I got some embossing powder on here. All fine. Little spritz. Powder's gone. Give it a wipe. And I did say I wanted to use a bit of this one, didn't I? And I think I do. Or maybe we'll use that as a detail stamp later on. So rather than having it embossed in the background, we'll let it take a more prominent position later. So the only thing you need to do with this now is use a heat gun to emboss it. And you will need a heat gun. It's no use trying to use a hairdryer on embossing powder. It simply won't get hot enough. Conversely, don't use a heat tool to dry your hair. You will end up with a scorched scalp. No good at all. So the magic of embossing powder remains a joy to me from the very first time I used it. You just see that moment where the little plastic granules go, and I'll pause as I'm doing it because that's not a problem. So you can see here it's melted, it's gone fully white. Here we've still got a little bit of the ink underneath showing. So if I carry on, I've got a very ancient heat tool, so I have to kind of aim the heat out of the bottom of it. If you've got a nice efficient embossing tool, I've always done my embossing with just my Ranger heat tool. I know there are specific embossing heat tools, embossing guns that I think heat hotter and maybe blow a bit less air, but I've never had a problem embossing with this. And then I'm trying to catch it in the light for you. Once it's embossed, you can see it's got that magical slight gloss. You can get matte embossing powders. You can get every kind of embossing powder these days. So I'm going to finish embossing these. You don't need to watch me using a heat tool. So I'll come back when we're fully embossed and we're going to have a play with putting some colour over these. Back in a sec. There we go, all nicely embossed. So I've got that little shimmer of white going on my paper. And in terms of resist strength, we had a look at the stamped paint resist the other day. That gives you a really beautifully weathered, faded sort of look. An embossed resist is always going to be what I would think of as a slightly stronger resist because they're melted plastic granules. So they're really going nowhere. They'll give you a kind of stronger contrast, but obviously white embossing powder on white paper, you really can't see it at the moment. I'm just taping that down to keep it still as we go on to our next stage of adding some colour, because it's when you add contrast that you're going to start seeing what's going on here. I've got my Summer Leaves watercolour paint created with Art to Basic. I chose the pigments, designed up the mix, so I'm very excited to have a little play with that. And as always, when I'm using watercolours, I'm going to give them little spritz of water in advance, just to let them warm up. I'm probably going to stick to my summer colours today. It's still summer. I'm influenced by the fact that I'm using a cornflower stamp, even though it's not a picture of a cornflower. So there are blues and greens going on all over the place. And I'm going to use the large brush to start with, because I just want a really loose look. So I'm going to let that watercolour paint warm up on the brush a little bit, let some of that pigment loosen, make friends with the water so that it can then come for a little dance across the page with me. So let's get just some green paint on the go. I'm going to zoom you in a bit so that you can maybe get a better look at what goes on here. I don't want to rob you of all the watercolour paints, but maybe this is the interesting thing. So I'm just, same thing you just saw me do. warming up into the watercolour paint. And I'm going to be quite loose about what happens. I can go right to the edge because I've got this lovely masking tape that's going to keep my frame whatever happens. So that's gone there. Let's have you going up through here. Summer Leaves is designed to be that green of the trees and the fields and the grasses, the meadows, just at the point when summer is about to leave. So we're right at those very end moments when the sun has been baking the countryside hard. If you're lucky enough to have any sun. It's been one of the wettest years I've experienced here, but we have got sun in between times, and I'm not complaining because it's meant I've had to do far less watering of the garden. So you can see I'm being quite loose. I'm letting that paint just kind of sit on the paper. I'm going to take maybe a little bit of the one sitting here. I'll list all these in the description below, the paints that I'm using. Oh, look at that. Beautiful kind of summer blue, ready to dive into. And then some water to just let it spread and blend with the green that's already there. Let's have a little bit more of that. Up in that corner, spreading down. Softer, less pigmented version going on up here. Oh, did you see the word cornflower just pop just then? That was lovely. Letting that just drip. And we'll have a little bit down here. Across into there. And you can see how that's just creating a really lovely blend of the colours. I'm grabbing something from up here. I don't really have a strong feeling about which one that is. I've popped these onto the tray and I'm happy to let what comes come. There's some blues going on in there as well. Nice soft turquoisey blue, or lavender blue really, isn't it? Let's have some of that there. Let's have some of this here. Spread it out a bit with some water. And spread some out maybe down here. So I'm trying, as well as the white resist, at the moment I'm quite happy to leave some white space on the postcards as well. I would quite like some proper dark pigment just to touch in places. Something really good and juicy. Just giving a bit of contrast. And I'm aiming that over the text so that the text can really pop. And then I'm just going to let those watercolours do what they want to do on the page. Maybe a little bit of spatter. You knew there was going to be spatter, didn't you? A little bit of that going across there. And maybe we just let that sit for a moment, take a look at it, see what's drawing my eye. And one thing is that I'm not enjoying, interestingly, the spatter right across the green there. So I'm going to revivify the green. I'm adding a little bit of some other green in here. I haven't yet had time to label the colours that are going on here. So mixing those two greens with some of that blue gives me a beautiful mixture of greens going on here now. A lovely kind of freshness, which is quite pleasing. I think we'll do the same over here because the spatter was just too strong. So again, that's a question of you try a thing, take a look. Do you like it? If not, change it. It's the joy of mixed media over clean and simple. Last week's video, clean and simple. There's much less room to hide. But when you're playing with mixed media, when you're playing with layers, you can change stuff. You can choose to add something over the top. Obviously, watercolours, if you keep on adding, there will become a point where you end up with something approaching mud. But at the moment, I'm pretty keen on what's going on here. So I'm going to try some green spatters and see if that makes me happier. Yes, of course it does. So again, I'm spattering principally with my own green. Paper towel, also your friend, so that's invading my white space. I'm going to take it away. I'd also like maybe a touch of extra texture through where I've already put things. So I'm just going to use the paper towel to just dab off a bit of colour in places. And it's picking it up sort of randomly and giving me extra texture. That's lovely and summery, isn't it? That's summer skies. You can see, because we've got liquid going on here and because I didn't tape my paper down hard, you can see it's getting a bit wrinkly. That's all fine. We can press it later under some books to flatten it out. But for now, I feel like I want to let that get on with what it's doing. And you can see there are places where the emboss comes through quite strongly. And if you want to help it, again, just a little dab away of the additional pigment right on that writing will rescue you a bit of pigment. Here, the embossing is sitting under quite pale paint, so that's why it's not showing up so well. So maybe we want to add a little more contrast to let that come through. Or maybe it's now just got so wet that actually that's soaked in behind the embossing, and we'll just have to wait and see when it's all dry whether that embossing comes back to the fore. But given we're going to be collaging over these in the long run in any case, again, it's nothing to worry about. It's a background. It's a background. Oh, see, I've just added a little bit more of my green to there, and I'm really enjoying that. It's got both a zing and a greyness to it, the Summer Leaves watercolour paint, and that makes it, for me, quite a joy to play with, because it's got both that thing that you can feel tickling in the edge of your teeth and tongue, but it's also got that sort of soft grey melancholy somewhere in the background. Good, I'm going to stop fiddling. It's really tempting with watercolours to just keep fiddling, but it's important to let them have a chance to do what they're going to do. As they dry, watercolours will always get paler. So the colour you've got here is going to get a little softer, but let it dry and we'll come back and have a look at what we might want to do next. These have dried nicely. They're still quite crinkly, so stamping is going to be interesting. Well, there's still a slightly damp patch there, but it's all going to be fine. It's no problem. I'm going to do some stamping. I'm carrying on with my own cornflower set because I do want to use this gorgeous circle badge here. There might be some cornflowers. I've got Tim Holtz Wildflowers. Again, details of all these will be in the description below. I've got my much loved We Love Vine by Rubber Dance Stamps, and I've got some green Archival inks. I've got blues hanging around as well. Excuse me. And I've got Pebble Beach just because we might want it. I'm going to start with the We Love, and I'm going to start with Olive Archival just because. Oh no, maybe. Oh, it doesn't matter. None of it matters. So we're still got the masking tape, so I can still kind of go over the edges, and I'm still going to get a nice framing effect. I'm stamping roughly. I'm not looking for perfect impressions at this point because it's, you know, it's out there in the summer, it's the wild meadows, it's all kind of beautiful things going on. So I'm just adding a touch of kind of echoes of botanical shapes more than I'm trying to get perfect stamped impressions. It's loose, following that kind of watercolour softness. The stamping is going to be loose and free and wild as well. And you can see in places I've gone right over the top of, and in fact it's going to happen again here, right over the top of my embossed resist. That's fine, that's layers, that's texture. You know how much I love that. I'm kind of with this one sticking mostly around the edges, as you can see, going up the sides, going across the bottom. And that's with a sort of view to creating a layered garden, creating some depth. I want a vine growing all the way over the top of this one. Again, I'm just looking as I go and seeing where I'd like a bit more detail. And obviously we need some down here. Where do we want it here? I think we want it kind of climbing up the side. And it's not quite tall enough to climb all the way up the side, so I need to give it some extra help down at the bottom with a secondary stamping. And then we'll take some into this lovely white space at the bottom here, so it's got a kind of clear run at that bottom corner. Yeah, that'll do for that one for now. We might come back to it. On the Wildflower, for some reason I'm obsessed with the absolute simplest stamp on the plate. We might do that in some leaf green. So again, just inking up. This one's quite tall, and so I'm not going to necessarily want it at full height. So that's fine when I'm stamping on this bottom corner, but if I'm going to do a similar thing up here, I'll just need to make sure I'm not putting stems floating in the middle of the sky here. You know, stems do float in the sky if they've broken off and a bird has dropped them on your head. But you might just want to be a little careful about quite where all your stamping ends up. There's just something about this one. I'm not quite sure. Slightly different angle so that it's growing out of the corner. I'm not quite sure what it is about this one that makes me so deeply happy, but it does. I'm going to do a full height stamping here, so it's going up into the top corner of that. And you can see I'm both over to the right here. Can you guess where I'm going to go on the top level? Yep, over to the left. So this one will go full height, and I'm plenty covered by the masking tape down below, so I'm not worried about that touching there. And then I'm going to do one where I'm just going to roll it so that I'm in charge of it not ending up down onto this one. And I think we might want just one more in there. Yep, happy making. Back onto the stamp block to stamp over here. And this one's going up into the sky, beautiful, kind of tall, and we've angled it that way there, so I'm just going to slightly angle it this way here, but then I might add another. Yeah, and the more I stamp this one, the more I want to stamp this one. It just keeps going. But I'm still leaving space in the middle here. It's not really with a plan so much as it's with an instinct that I might want this kind of sense of framing coming in from the sides. Let's take a look at what we've got. Put the lid back on that. Let's take a look. Quite a nice layout there. 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 I think what I'm itching for is a bit of spatter, but I'm gonna be patient for one moment longer. I'm going to use this lovely round stamp. Let's pop that with the Tim Holtz's. Because we've got lots of organic shapes, we've got lots of text, and so my brain at the moment is just slightly wanting something a little bit geometric. I'm using Hydrangea on this one, which is one of the ones we used last week for the watercolour stamping, but I don't think I want the full-on Hydrangea, so I'm just going to do a little stamp off and then a stamp on, so I'm getting a much softer bluey Hydrangea colour. It's such a highly pigmented ink, this one. So again, I'm stamping off and then stamping on. So it's less in your face. If I did a full-on Hydrangea stamping, I think it might be a bit much for my nervous disposition. But all these are available for cutting out later to use on other projects. And again, I'm just kind of, that's gone near the top, that's gone left, that's gone right near the bottom. I don't know where this last one's going to go. Stamp it off. Stamp it on. And all of them are partial stampings. So although you can see the whole circle at the moment, I'm about to peel off this masking tape and then you'll have much less. What do we think? Is that enough geometric stamping? Do we want maybe a touch more just coming in from various places? Not to forget my secondary stamping of much smaller version, just tipping onto the edge there. Same again. One. And, ooh, where? I think there. One, off, on, and one, off, on. Ooh, I sort of want one up there. I'm a bit worried about this one. I'm not sure it's the right thing to do, but I'm doing it anyway. Yeah, just a touch, just a smidge, just a smidge. And it's now really pale because I'm almost at the end of the ink on the stamp. And look at all these I can cut out later and use on something else. So I think it might be peeling time. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. Pop that over there. And first of all, I'm going to take it away from here. So I've got that softness. And then we're going to see how cooperative or not our masking tape is willing to be. So just loosening it off the silicone mat. And here goes nothing. I don't remember which order I put them in on. On, in. Don't remember which order I put them in on. On, in, on, and on, and on and on. I think I'd like you to go away because you're being a bit annoying now. And let's peel. The magic of the peel and reveal. Now, why are you sticking? If you're not going to cooperate, I'll take scissors to you. And away we go. Up the side, revealing our little side margin. Up the middle, or is the next one? I think the next one's this one. Around the edge. Oh yes, because I put the two middle ones on first, didn't I? So if you see it start to peel, you can just come to the other end, see if it's going to be more cooperative from there. So let's take that one, because that is cooperating. I love masking tape coming away. And that magic as your clean edge gets revealed. So let's peel here. And you'll notice I'm almost doubling back. That somehow seems to put less pressure on the paper. That sort of backwards fold of the masking tape. So let's see if we can get it to be a bit friendlier from this end than it was being at that end. Away it comes. Marvellous. I think we went vertical first, didn't we? So it should be this one next. Away it comes. So as you can see, in the middle, this is the full width of the masking tape. This is half the width of the masking tape. But when I cut across the middle here, it's going to give me even borders all the way around. Final piece coming up the middle. Final little bit of masking tape magic. And there's something to me always really delightful about seeing them full on the page like that. I could, of course, take this over to a guillotine, but I'm just not that bothered about straight lines and perfection. So I'm going to eyeball it up the middle of here. I can always trim later if it's really annoyingly off-center, which it slightly is. So instead of trimming later, I'm going to trim right now. And just make that a slightly thinner edge down the side of there. These are the large Tim Holtz shears, which is a lovely thing because they've got such a long blade that it's pretty hard not to cut a straight line with them. So here, because I've got white space at the top of the bottom one and at the bottom of the top one, it's less easy to see where my dividing line is. But that gives me those. And then eyeballing here much easier because I've got paint coming right to the edge on both sides. So it's kind of clearer to see where I'm cutting. Even so, that little edge wants trimming. just to create it the same width as all the others. I think that little top edge might want a bit of trimming, but for now, I'm just enjoying those summery backgrounds. So there'll be a future episode of A Few Minutes of Fun, obviously, to take those on a bit further. But I am, before I finish, as one final act, going to give them a bit of spatter. So I've got a little bit of PaperArtsy Fresco Finish chalk acrylic in Snowflake, as always. I've got my really scabby, damaged brush that I like to spatter with, a bit of water from the water jar to just soften that white paint. I tend to do a little bit of spatter off just to see what I'm getting, and then on it goes. Oh, happy summer day. And it's about sort of motes of sunlight dancing. It's little molecules of dust and pollen in the air catching the light, catching the summer light in the meadow. It gives you a sense of movement, the breeze, it gives you a sense of spontaneity. It's the magic of the spatter. There they are. So, as always, I'll take you for a little close-up musical montage at the very end of the video, but I hope you've enjoyed seeing that little quartet of postcards come together. That's scrunch, 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 is me throwing away the masking tape, because I don't think it's got quite enough on it to be interesting this time around. I did save some from a previous one, and you can use that as washi tape, but this time around there wasn't enough of interest to make it worth saving those bits of masking tape. So if you've enjoyed that, I hope you'll give it a thumbs up. Do leave any comments or questions down below. Stick around for the musical montage, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel, I'd love to have your company on this creative journey. I'll see you again very soon, maybe immediately with the follow-up to this, or maybe we'll do something else first and come back to see what we're going to do with these a bit later on. Happy crafting all.